December 24th, 2008 at 11:30 p.m. in Covina, California, 45-year-old Bruce Pardo walks up to the front door of his ex-in-law's home dressed in a Santa suit. Inside the home were 25 guests and family enjoying a Christmas party. Pardo was carrying a wrapped package containing a rolling air compressor converted to spray gasoline. He also had 4 9mm semi-automatic handguns. The attack began just moments after the door was opened. Pardo first shot his 8-year-old niece, Katrina, in the face as she was running up to him to hug him. He then opened fire on the fleeing guests. Police would later speculate that Pardo stood over and pointedly executed some of the victims using other handguns. Next, Pardo unwrapped the package and sprayed gasoline to set the home ablaze. There was one survivor who managed to escape to the neighbor's home and call police. The fire soared approximately 40 to 50 feet, and it took 80 firefighters an hour and a half to put it out. The heat was so intense that victims had to be identified by dental and medical records. Next, Pardo put on regular clothes, got into his rented Dodge Caliber, and drove to his brother's home 30 miles away in Sylmar. This is where Bruce Pardo's body was found. He died of a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. His brother wasn't home when Pardo took his own life. During the investigation, it was discovered Pardo purchased an airline ticket for a flight on Air Canada. It was thought Pardo intended to flee to Canada. Continued investigating uncovered the flight itinerary on Northwest Airlines was from Los Angeles to Moline, Illinois, with a layover in Minnesota. Days before, Pardo had called a high school friend to tell him he was planning to visit. Pardo had visited the friend in October of 2008. However, it's unclear if Pardo truly intended to visit the friend or if the flight was intended to fool law enforcement. It's believed Pardo changed plans and went to his brother's home because he suffered third-degree burns on his arm from the homemade flamethrower. When his body was found, he had $17,000 in cash cling-wrapped to his legs inside a girdle. His rental car was located parked 1 block from his brother's home. Inside were remnants of the Santa suit, 4 13-round capacity handguns, empty, and at least 200 rounds of ammunition. Police dispatched the bomb squad to remove a portion of the Santa suit using a robot. They accidentally started a fire inside the car, which destroyed the Santa suit. Police discovered 5 empty boxes for semi-automatic handguns, a Benelli M2 tactical shotgun, and a container for high-octane fuel tank gas. They also located what was described as a, quote, virtual bomb factory inside Pardo's home in Montrose. Investigators speculate that the motive was marital problems. Pardo's ex-wife Sylvia had settled for divorce the week prior. They had been married for 1 year. Bruce Pardo and Sylvia Ortega Pardo married in January 2006. However, there were troubles from the start. Pardo refused to open a joint account and also expected Sylvia to take care of her 3 children using her own finances. There's also been speculation that Pardo was concealing a child from a previous relationship, and that is what caused the divorce. The child had been severely injured in a swimming pool accident several years prior. Pardo did not support his child or pay child support to his ex-wife and her children. In June 2008, Pardo was ordered to pay $1,785 a month in spousal support. Pardo confided to a friend that his wife was, quote, taking him to the cleaners. Further adding to the stress, in July 2008, Pardo was fired from his job as an electrical engineer at ITT Electronic Systems Radar Systems. He was reportedly fired for billing false hours. The court suspended the support payments in July due to job hardship. According to court documents, Pardo was required to pay $10,000 to Sylvia as part of the divorce settlement. Sylvia also kept the wedding ring and the family dog. According to a court declaration, Pardo complained that Sylvia was living with her parents, not paying rent, and spent lavishly on a luxury car, gambling trips to Las Vegas, meals at fine restaurants, massages, and golf lessons. Autopsies would later reveal that 3 victims died from gunshot wounds alone. 4 victims died from a combination of gunshot wounds and the fire. 2 victims died from the fire alone. 13 children were orphaned. 2 lost one parent. Katrina, who was 8 at the time, suffered severe but non-life-threatening injuries. A 16-year-old girl was shot and wounded in the back, and a 20-year-old woman suffered from a broken ankle due to jumping out a second-story window. George Sauter, born George Sadu in Tula, Sardinia, Italy, immigrated to the United States in 1908. Sauter found work in Pennsylvania on the railroads, bringing water and other supplies to workers. A few years later, he worked as a driver in Smithers, West Virginia. He then started his own trucking company. He met and married Jenny Cipriani, the daughter of a shopkeeper who also immigrated from Italy as a child. George and Jenny Sauter settled in Fayetteville and had 10 children: John, Joseph, Marion, George Jr., Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, Betty, and Sylvia. Marion, the oldest Sauter daughter, who worked at a dime store in downtown Fayetteville, surprised 3 of her younger sisters, Martha, 12, Jenny, 8, and Betty, 5, with new toys that she had bought. They were so excited, they asked their mom to stay up past their bedtime. At 10 p.m., after telling the younger children they could stay up as long as the 2 oldest boys were awake and reminding Maurice and Louis to put the cows in and feed the chickens, Jenny Sauter took 2-year-old Sylvia upstairs and went to bed. George Sr., John, and George Jr., who had spent the day working together, were already asleep. Joseph was away serving in the army. At 10:30 a.m., the telephone rings. Jenny woke up and went downstairs to answer it. The voice on the line was a woman she didn't recognize who asked for someone she didn't know. Jenny could hear laughter and clinking glasses in the background. Jenny told the caller she had the wrong number and would later recall the woman's, quote, weird laugh in response. She hung up the phone and headed to bed. In doing so, she noticed the lights were on and the curtains weren't closed. Jenny thought it odd, as the children normally would remember to do that if they stayed up later than their parents. She saw Marion asleep on the couch and assumed the other children were asleep in their attic bedroom. Jenny closed the curtains, turned off the lights, and went to bed. At 1 a.m., Jenny is again woken up. this time by an object hitting the roof, causing a loud bang and then followed by a rolling noise. Hearing nothing else, Jenny drifted back to sleep. At 1:30 a.m., Jenny wakes up again to the smell of smoke. She got up and found George's office was on fire around the telephone line and fuse box. Jenny woke up George, who then woke up his two older sons. George, Jenny, and 4 of their children, Marion, Sylvia, John, and George Jr., escaped the home. They yelled upstairs to the other children but got no answer. No attempt to go up to the attic was made because the stairway was ablaze. Since the house telephone didn't work, Marion ran to a neighbor's to call the fire department. There was a driver on the nearby road who saw the flames and called from a nearby tavern. Unfortunately, the call was unsuccessful because they couldn't reach the operator or because the phone turned out to be broken. Eventually, either the neighbor or the driver were successful reaching the fire department from another phone in the middle of town. Meanwhile, a barefoot George climbed the wall and broke open the window, cutting his arm. George and his sons had wanted to use a ladder to reach and rescue the other children. However, the ladder the Sodders had wasn't in its usual spot resting against the house. It couldn't be found nearby either. The Sodders had a barrel full of water that could have been used to extinguish the fire, but it was frozen solid. Next, they tried unsuccessfully to pull 2 trucks George used for work up to the house in a desperate attempt to rescue his children. Both trucks wouldn't start, even though both trucks worked perfectly the day before. The 6 Sodders had no choice but to watch their home burn down and collapse over the next 45 minutes. They all assumed the other 5 children had died in the fire. Eventually, later that morning, the fire department arrived. Being low on manpower due to the war, relying on individual firefighters to call each other, and Fire Chief F.J. Morris's inability to drive a fire truck all contributed to the fire department's slow response time. One of the firefighters, Morris, a brother of Jeannie's, told the Sodders they had found no bones in the rubble and ash. Another account says they did find a few bone fragments and internal organs. However, they chose not to tell the family. Morris believed the missing 5 children had died in the fire, suggesting it had not been hot enough to burn the bodies completely. Morris instructed George to leave the site undisturbed. He told George that the state's fire marshal could conduct a more thorough investigation. After 4 days, unable to bear the site anymore, George bulldozed 5 feet of dirt over the site so that it could become a memorial garden for the children. The next day, the local coroner convened an inquest. It was determined the fire was the result of faulty wiring. On December 30th, death certificates were issued for the 5 children. A funeral was held on January 2nd, 1946 for the children, but George and Jenny were too grief-stricken to attend. Their surviving children, however, did attend the funeral. As the family sought to rebuild their lives, they began to question the official findings regarding the fire. Their second oldest son, Joe, had left home in 1943 to serve in the military during World War II. The next year, in 1944, Benito Mussolini had been deposed and executed. George Sodder was known around town to be strident in his opposition to the Italian dictator. It caused strong arguments with other members of the immigrant community. In October 1945, an insurance salesman visited the Sodder home. After the Sodders rebuffed him, he said to George that his house, quote, would go up in smoke and your children are going to be destroyed, end quote, due to all, quote, the dirty remarks you have been making about Mussolini, end quote. The insurance salesman will later become a jury member during the coroner's inquest. There was another visitor to the Sodder home who was looking for work. He went around to the back of the home and warned George that a pair of fuse boxes would, quote, cause a fire someday, end quote. This left George puzzled because he had had the home rewired when the electric stove was installed. The local electric company had told George it was safe. Also, George's older sons recall seeing a strange car parked along the main highway through town. The occupants had been watching the younger Sodder children in the weeks before Christmas. The Sodders also wondered if the cause of the fire had been electrical. Why did the Christmas lights remain on during the early stages of the fire? The missing ladder was located at the bottom of an embankment 75 feet away from the home. A telephone repairman reported that the home phone line had not been burned through in the fire, but had been cut at the pole. The person who had cut the line had to climb 14 feet, then reach 2 feet away from the pole to cut the line. Neighbors reported a man who had been seen stealing a block and tackle from the property around the time of the fire. The man was identified and arrested. He admitted to the theft and claimed he had cut the telephone line by mistake. He thought he cut the power line. There's no record of the suspect's identification. There's also no explanation as to why he would need to cut power lines to steal a block and tackle. Jenny Sodder would go on to say in 1968 that had the power lines been cut, she, her husband, and the 4 children would never have been able to escape the house. Jenny, unable to accept Morris's findings that the children's bodies had burned completely in the fire, began conducting experiments on her own. Adding to her doubt was the fact that many of the appliances had been found in the ash and were still recognizable. There were also fragments of the tin roof. There was another similar house fire that killed a family of 7. Skeletal remains of all 7 victims had been found. Jenny began burning animal bones to see if they would be completely consumed, and none ever were. She contacted a crematorium who told her human bones remain even after a body is cremated at 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit for 2 hours, which was far longer than the house fire lasted. Over the years, the Sodders continued their belief that their children were still alive and out in the world somewhere. They put up flyers with the children's pictures, offering a $5,000 reward, which was soon doubled. In 1952, 2 billboards were put up, one at the side of the house and one along U.S. Route 60 near Ansted. In subsequent years, the family received many tips claiming they had seen the children. George Sodder followed each and every lead in person. In 1967, the Sodder family received a letter postmarked in Central City, Kentucky. Inside was a picture of a young man who looked to be in his 30s. He had features that strongly resembled Lewis. On the back of the picture was written, "Lewis Sodder, I love brother Frankie, 3 boys, the letter A, 90132, or A, 90135. The family hired another private investigator and added the picture to the billboard. The private investigator never reported back to the family, and they were never able to locate the investigator again. George Sodder died in 1969. Jenny continued to stay in the family's home after his death. She wore black for the rest of her life and tended to the garden at the site of her former home. Jenny Sodder died in 1989. After her death, the family took the battered billboard down. The remaining Sodder children and their children continue to publicize the case and investigate leads. Charles Lawson met and married Fanny Manning in 1911. The couple had 8 children together: Marie, Arthur, William, Carrie, Maybelle, James, and Mary Lou. William died of an illness in 1920. In 1918, Lawson's younger brothers, Marion and Elijah, moved to the Germantown area. George and his family followed, where they worked as tenant tobacco farmers until 1927, when they had saved enough money to buy their own farm on Brook Cove Road. Days before Christmas, Charlie and Fanny Lawson took all 7 of their children into town to buy new clothes and have a family portrait taken. In 1929, this was unusual for a working-class rural family to do. Later, this would lead to speculation that what followed was premeditated. However, the fact that just 2 years prior, Lawson had purchased his own farm, and that an Associated Press wire that had gone out the day after the murders described Lawson as a, quote, well-to-do farmer, would make the pre-Christmas shopping and portrait appear reasonable. On December 25th, in the afternoon, Charlie Lawson made his 2 daughters, Carrie and Maybelle, his first victims. The girls were on their way to their aunt and uncle's home. Lawson waited for his daughters by the tobacco barn until they were in range. Once they were, Lawson shot them with a 12-gauge shotgun. He bludgeoned them to ensure that they were dead before placing their bodies in the tobacco barn. Next, Lawson went to the house, where he shot his wife Fanny, who was on the porch. Inside the house, Marie heard the gunshot, which caused her to scream. Her brothers, James and Raymond, tried to find a place to hide. Lawson shot Marie as he entered the house. He found the 2 boys and killed them. His final victim, Mary Lou, who was just a baby, was thought to have been bludgeoned. Lawson then went into the nearby woods. Several hours later, he shot himself. Arthur, age 16, was the only survivor. He had been sent by his father to run errands shortly before Lawson committed the murders. The errand Arthur was sent to run is disturbing as well. He was sent with a cousin to trudge through the snow to Germantown to purchase more shotgun shells for his father. When he returned, he found his mother and siblings dead, and the interior of the house looked like it had been drenched with buckets of blood. Arthur ran to a neighbor's to ask the man to call the sheriff. Arthur thought that an intruder had broken in and killed his family. Law enforcement, after arriving on the scene, realized that it had been Charlie who murdered his entire family. Arthur fainted in the front yard when he was told. When hours passed with no sign of Charlie, men combed the surrounding woods. The family's bodies were all found with their arms crossed and rocks under their heads. After hearing about the murders, multiple people had gathered at the farm. They heard the gunshot from the woods. Arthur and the police officer who was with him ran into the woods. There, along with Lawson's body, were letters to his parents and footprints that encircled a tree that suggested Lawson had paced around the tree for hours before taking his own life. Initially, Charlie Lawson's family and friends theorized that the motive for the murders was due to a head injury Lawson sustained months before the murders. They believed that it altered his mental state. An analysis of Lawson's brain conducted at Johns Hopkins Hospital revealed no abnormalities. In 1990, a book titled White Christmas, Bloody Christmas, written by Trudy J. Smith, offered another, more sinister motive for the massacre. A claim that Lawson had been S.A.ing Marie surfaced. The claim began from an anonymous source who heard the rumor during a tour of the Lawson home, shortly after the murders. On the day before the book was published, the author received a telephone call from Stella Lawson. Stella had already been interviewed for the book. According to Stella, she overheard Fanny's sister-in-laws and aunts, including Stella's mother, Jettie Lawson, discussing something Fanny had confided in them. Fanny said she was concerned about a, quote, incestuous relationship, end quote, between Charlie and Marie. Jettie Lawson died in early 1928. The murders took place at the end of 1929. This suggests that Fanny had been suspicious of the incest for at least a year. This theory gained more support when another book by the same author titled The Meaning of Tears was published in 2006. According to the book, a close friend of Marie's named Ella May had come forward. According to Ella May, Marie disclosed to her that she was pregnant by her own father a few weeks before Christmas. Marie went on to say that both Charlie and Fanny knew about this. Hill Hampton, a close friend and neighbor of the Lawsons, stated he was aware of serious problems within the family. Hill declined to elaborate any further. Marion Lawson, Charlie's brother, opened the home as a tourist attraction shortly after the murders. On display was a cake Marie baked on Christmas Day. Tourists began picking the raisins to take home as a souvenir, so the cake was placed in a glass server for several years.
Merry Christmas, you filthy animal.